Well, good afternoon, and thank you. I hope you're having a good time here at the conference. I know I am. I'm Bert, and this is Rico. And
Are you able to hear us?
before I get started, what we're gonna go over, I want to thank you for coming, but also I want to make sure you're actually in the right presentation. So when we want to share our experience when we did a defensive driving effectiveness study. So we want to share some of the challenges that we had, and but also give you some tips that might help you either get promoted, get a pay raise, or at least be recognized. So if you're looking for some of that, then you're in the right presentation. Actually, that's how I got this job when I came from corrections. I told them I did a defensive driving, and the recidivism study. So what we want to go over today is what is the defensive driving study. So Richard's going to go over that, some of the data and what a defensive driving, who's eligible. That way it'll give you a better idea why we had the challenges. And like everybody else, we landed in the middle of the pandemic, the data. So we want to go over some of those challenges that we had there too. So like I said, the study and the defensive driving, and then we're going to get into the challenges that we had with not only missing data, trying to use data that wasn't really supposed to be used for this study, and also how do we, the challenges every time we meet with the executive office, they change their mind and they want more reporting. And so we don't have another month to do. They still want it on time. So on that, Richard's going to go over the purpose.
Hello, everyone. How many of you have received a traffic ticket? Well, in Arizona, you can either pay for the traffic ticket, or you can go to court and fight it, or you can go to defensive driving school. So the purpose of this study we did was to evaluate the effectiveness of defensive driving, and we needed to create a comparison group. So we wanted to compare it to people who did not take the class. We also wanted to see if there was differences among the different rural and urban counties, as well as age and gender. As Bert mentioned, there were some challenges. One of which was we were using data from case management systems that the purpose was not for research. So we needed to narrow down 6.5 million records. And also, there was instances where we got from some of the courts, they'll send us the data that there was some missing data. And so we asked the courts, hey, can you give us the information? Yeah, we can give it to you in about 2 to 3 months. So we needed to deal with that aspect of it. And we couldn't randomly assign people into the program and not in the program of the comparison group. So we had issues of selection bias. As well as there was scope creep, where leadership wanted to know additional information. So to anticipate that, we developed a unique approach to that. So the solution was narrowing the scope of the 6.5 records. Instead of waiting for the data to come in for gender, we imputed the data for missing records, as well as we used a matching algorithm to reduce selection bias when we created the comparison group. And Bert is going to go over this, but we use an innovative reporting to use multidimensional arrays to expand capacity, anticipating any request. Let me tell you about the program. So the defensive driving program is to reduce traffic accidents, to make the roads safer in the highways and the streets. So drivers, they will enroll into the program to dismiss a traffic citation or to avoid points on their driving record, which eventually, if you get points, too many points, then your insurance rate, your car insurance will go up. In order to be eligible, you couldn't have taken this class in the previous 12 months prior to your citation that you're taking the class for. And it had to be an eligible traffic violation. It couldn't be like a criminal offense or an accident that caused a death somewhere. Or it couldn't be like a DUI. So prior to 2016, drivers were allowed to take the defensive driving class every 2 years. After 2016, the state law changed where you can take it once a year. So approximately 20% of traffic violations, people went to a defensive driving course. But after 2016, people can reconcile their traffic violation. About 25% reconcile it. So I want to go over the overview of the method, but I'm going to go over the data sources. Bert's then going to talk about narrowing the scope of the data, as well as how you dealt with the missing data issue. And I'll talk about how we created the comparison group to reduce selection bias. And then Bert will go over the innovative reporting for using multidimensional arrays. There was 2 data sources. One was from the defensive driving database, which had driver's license numbers and information and instructional method. And the second data source was the databases from the court case management. So we got driver's license, birth year, gender, and violation types, as well as the dates. And we got it from 167 justice and municipal courts. Now Bert will speak about how we narrowed the scope of the data. Bert?
You know, I got to tell you a story. My kids just went off to college, but they didn't take any of their stuff. The rooms were still full. So my wife and I started making 3 piles, one that we wanted to keep kind of for posterity, one that we're going to take to the Goodwill, and one that's just going to go in a dumpster. That's kind of the approach that I took with this, because this data was originally collected to track the cases that were coming through the courts at the beginning of the pandemic. That's why the data only starts in 2019. And so we can go back in 2020 and start comparing and saying, well, are the numbers going up or they're going down? It sounds like a silly approach, but if you've ever done a defensive driving study, it requires a huge amount of data because you got to track all the individuals across the whole state. So we use the same data. I was not about to tell the Chief Justice, oh, by the way, it's going to take us another 6 months to collect data. We have 200 courts. We have 10,000 employees. It just takes a lot of work to do that.
I'm a co-speaker, but I can't.
So we started with the same data, 6.5 million.
Thanks.
So we say, okay, now we got to start kicking out anybody that had an assault or any other offense, drug offense. So that way, we can get down to what we're going to do with the study. So eventually, we started forming 2 groups, civil traffic and criminal traffic, since the defensive driving is to improve your driving out there. By the time we got through, we also excluded anybody that got that was out of state. So everybody from California was not in our study. That's what we get. I only included Arizona. So we went from 6.5 to 3.6 million records. The interesting thing is about this time when I was doing the study, I said to myself, well, wouldn't it be nice if I took one of these classes so I can see exactly what what are they teaching? I've never gotten a ticket. Lo and behold, the next week, I got a photo enforcement. And so I said, well, there you go. So I went, you have to go to the executive office and say, by the way, I've gotten a ticket, and so I took it this way. I said, I'm taking one for the team. This was on purpose so I can do the study. It wasn't true, but. So when we looked at the data, we also wanted to make sure we had enough data to actually do the study. So we wanted to make sure we had the traffic violations for both groups, and then enough data in 2020 because that was the group that we were going to choose. A valid driver's license, gender and age. I'll tell you a little bit more about gender. Believe it or not, I wasn't going to do it by gender. But when I met with the executive office, they always change the rules on me. And it's not like you can sit there and argue with them. They want you to stay on schedule and do what you said you were going to do. And then also make sure that those that went to defensive driving, that we actually found a code for them. If we didn't find that, then we're gonna kick them out. So let's get to the meat of a little bit of some of the things that we actually did. Like I said, it was like cleaning out those 2 rooms. I started grouping things by criminal, civil traffic, and then in traffic, then I broke that down into a little bit more detail. And really, I just used the Arizona revised statutes to do that. And then also anybody that had a driver's license. But I want to show you what that looks like once I was done. So now you see the 2 groups up there, criminal and civil traffic, justice and municipal courts. And that allowed me to start kicking out anybody that didn't fit into those categories. And those are the 3.6 million records that I was talking about. And then we took civil traffic and then broke it down even further. And the reason we do that is when we track some of these individuals, maybe the people that speed are the ones that are getting the most tickets. That's not quite true. They all get a lot of tickets. I should tell you that one of the ones that's on here, well, later on, we also took a look at if you're driving and using your phone. And that, believe it or not, they both seem to function the same. Those that took the class and didn't take the class got reoffended just as the same. I thought that was interesting. So our recommendation is that they change the class and add a little bit more to that. And this is the code. I know, all this information will be available, but I think it's important sometimes just to show you what the code looks like. And we just take the statutes and start grouping them into those categories. So there's nothing really magical about it, but it saves us a lot of time, a lot of effort. And if you're in SAS, you have to validate everything you do, because somebody's going to say, give me a list of those cases. And at the bottom, you see we just took anybody from Arizona. So that was the, kind of narrowing the scope. And then we get into the missing data. When I got into a meeting with a month to go, they said, well, by the way, we won by gender. I said, okay, I don't remember validating gender. So I went back, and to my horror, I had 313,000 records with no missing gender. And so I contacted the court. I said, what gives here? They said, well, remember that ticket that you got? It was the same court, by the way. We don't capture gender. And so I called. I said, how long would it take to fix this? They said 3 months. My big boss says, you have 1 month and you're going to present to the committee. I said, well, what am I going to do? A little panic kind of sets in for a while, and then we kind of calm down and start Googling. Well, I couldn't find anybody that was doing this stuff that I can do it quickly. But then the solution seemed to be staring me right in the face. We use other individuals in the same database. Remember, we have millions of records. So how did we do that? It was very easy, actually. We sorted the data by first name and gender, and then we just counted all the males and all the females within that name, which you see here. And so, like in this example, you see that Johnny, 7 of them came out males, 1 came out female. So now we can write the code very easily and say, okay, if the count for males is greater than that, then it's male. And this worked out really well. By the time I wrote this program probably in the morning, so it saved me a lot of time, a lot of effort, plus going back to the management and saying I can't do it. And we went from 313,000 to 6,000 records that were still missing. That translated to only 300 at the end that we couldn't use. So reducing bias, Richard's going to go over that.
So in creating the comparison group, those who did not go into the defensive driving program, we wanted to reduce selection bias because we couldn't randomly assign them to either the program as well as to the comparison group. After narrowing the scope of data, we honed in on approximately 111,000 drivers who took the defensive driving class. And we computed a comparison group, and we matched them by 12 months during the baseline year of 2020. That's when they received the initial qualifying ticket. 2 metropolitan counties and a collective of the rural counties as well as age and gender. And this is a distribution of the matching result. This is for baseline year 2020, from January to December. And basically, this is the proportion of traffic tickets distributed across the 12-month period. And the blue is indicative of the defensive driving cohort, and the red color represents the comparison group. As you can see, the pandemic hit around March, and only essential drivers in Arizona were allowed to drive in April. So that's why the traffic tickets dropped in April. And it started picking up in a way because they started lifting the restrictions on who could be on the roads and driving. We also were able to match on the county, on urban and rural counties. Maricopa County is the largest county in the state of Arizona. So about 65% of all traffic tickets occurred in Maricopa County. The second urban county we have is where Tucson is located. About 13% occurred in there. And then we just compared it to collectively, we just looked at all the rural counties combined. We also were able to match on age and gender. For age, you can see the distribution, how there's a peak around 19 and 24-year-olds, and it starts dropping down as the older you get. And for gender, males were more likely to have an initial traffic ticket than females. The way we match is we use a matching algorithm. So first we needed to sort the data. So we sorted it by county, age, and gender. And then we created this random number, and we sorted it by that random number. The blue, the light blue, represents an example, a case. Let's say this person, well, not this person, there's 6 individuals who are female, who are the same age category, the same county, in the same month. And we sorted it to create like a group based on all these variables. And this is the code that we use to code the process for each group separately that we sorted them by. And after sorting, we created 2 count fields. One for those who attended the defensive driving program and those in the comparison group. And then we cumulatively counted the individuals that were in these groups. We did that for both the cohort who attended the defensive driving and those who did not. And then we outputted the data once there was a match. Let me explain this a different way. So this is an example. So for the cohort count, you can see that it's pre-sorted. So we just counted 1 plus 1 is a 2 plus another one is a 3. Once we maximize for other individuals who have those characteristics, it stopped at 6. And then for the control group, the same thing. For those in the control group, we went from 1 all the way to 6. And then once we reached the 6, we outputted the data, and then that's how we created the comparison group. And now Bert will be talking about the novel approach used in reporting.
Thanks, Rico. So this is the way we match. I'm sure there's a lot of other methods that you can use, but this seemed to be the simplest way that we did it. Sometimes we're trying to build some credibility too, that we're just not picking women that have a lower recidivism. So we're not going to stack the cards against us. We want to make sure that those are the same in the other group. The cohort group, by the time they got here, they had already been vetted, make sure they didn't have an offense the prior 12 months. Just like those people that went to defensive driving could not have an offense the prior 12 months. And we showed this data. This actually is a paper that's published on our website at the Arizona Supreme Court. and people can see more of the detail. It's like a 30-page paper, more of the detailed results. But I think some of these things that we learned and some of the challenges that we had, I think can be applied to other things, not just defensive drive. Defensive drive can get kind of complicated. So to that point, I left the best for last, the complicated part of reporting. Now it looks complicated, but it's not. It's just a way of reporting that makes it easier for us. The data looks like this to us. So it's very complicated to add defensive driving. So for example, January, yeah, as soon as they reoffend in January, we can say, okay, it took 1 month or less than 1 month. But by the time we get to December, we're a year out. So when you do a defensive driving study for 12 months, you need 2 years of data because December has to go all the way out. I normally don't do recidivism this way. I'll take maybe March from 1 year and the next year. And so I want to say that because the arrays are built that way. They're built to handle 48 months, depending what you want to do. And that's to make sure that if it's working, it should be really reliable in terms of your results. If 1 year you get 20% and the next year you get 50%, well, there's something wrong. And so the biggest reason we did this was because of the COVID. I felt that COVID was messing with the first couple months, so I wanted to make sure that I had at least 12 months of data to make sure that didn't happen. But this is the way we actually report it. So anybody, all the 12 months, we can say how many took 1 month, and then we can add them all up and say, okay, we have however number, and we can come out with a recidivism number. And going across, like I said, we only did it for 12 months. It's rare that I go 12 months. I'd like to go to 24 months. When I work for corrections, we always did them by 12 months. By 24 months. And like for example, the state of Arizona, after 24 months, 43% of the individuals will reoffend. This one, because they're eligible every 12 months, it didn't make sense. So these are the results. This is actually the results of the two-dimension arrays, or the arrays that we use. So you can see that if we look at January, 87 individuals reoffended. But we want to take the average of that, not the actual number, but the average of that percentage. And so we can get a recidivism rate for every month. At the end, out of 110,000, 17,000 reoffended. Of those that went to defensive driving. So these are the raw numbers. The problem is we don't use, we actually use a cumulative. So let's talk about the macros that or the SAS program that we use. Some of these things are very elementary, so I don't go into how to build this or anything. Most of you have used these a lot. These are just the formats because management doesn't like to see a 1. They want to see January, and they want to see exactly what month you're talking about. We also create 3 macros, and that's because these are the macros that we're going to pass through the program to say we need to report by gender, by age, even by statute, by zip code. When I was in Department of Corrections, I had a meeting with the chief warden, and he says, I want you to do the recidivism by the size of the shoe. I said, you're joking, right? He said, no, I'm being serious. I have a feeling that the size of the shoe makes a difference. I said, okay, I guess that's your money. So I developed this method that I don't want to be caught flat-footed, because if you report anything else, you better make sure you're right. People could lose their jobs, so it's important. I don't like to revalidate the whole reporting system. I just want to pass it just a different variable. He also wanted the data by the astrology. He felt that those that were born in different months might have a higher recidivism rate. I said, okay, so we'll do that by that too. So if you have the month and the year, you can do it. I did this one by astrology. It doesn't make any difference. So that's why we have that. But the major one that you see there is the cohort category. That's because no matter what, you always have to separate those that went to defensive driving and those that the control group. And so like I said, it might look complicated, but it's not. So we use four arrays. We use MO is a two-dimension. That's the data that you saw earlier. We just added the numbers. That's all it's doing. It's nothing really complicated. The second one is because now we need the numbers, a cumulative number, and we want to have that so we can do a recidivism. And then we use, I call it, you know, you can tell I'm old school when I start using less than eight characters to name these fields. I've been using SAS for like 30 years, and I still have a tendency to not write it all out. So that's the follow-up months. And then the percent, the recidivism rate. And so those are the four arrays that we use. And so depending, you can see here one of the macros, cohort sort. That's what we're sorting by up here. We're sorting by 2, 3. And so that's always something that we always have to sort the data, so make sure you get the right results. This is pretty common. If you're using any of these, think of these as almost like a retain statement. If you do not clear them out, you'll start merging results from one group to another. And that's all this is. It's just to clear out the follow-up months and the control month, the baseline months, the 12 months. If you notice, I remember I mentioned that it's actually built to do 48 months. That's why you have 50. The first 48 are for the months, and then the last 2 are for totals. And this one is really the only one that's adding, once you come back, it just wants to know what month, what baseline month. If it's January, did you come in 7 months ago? And that's all that is, and it adds a 1 to that. That's all it does. The second portion does a cumulative, but it also does the percent, the recidivism rate. Like I said, they're kind of fun to use, but they're kind of hard to validate the first time. Once you write them, though, they're pretty good. That's why I decided to include them. If you want to use them, they've been validated. And then at the end, we use the last 2, the FUP, which is 1 dimension, and the PCT to start outputting whatever I want. And at the very end, I say, well, I'm only looking at the first 12 months, so I only need 1 through 12. And I only need the totals, so only output the total. And that's all it does. It only outputs whatever we want. And then we use a very rude, kind of like crude proc print. I guess I could have made this prettier, but I didn't. PC1, and then just use labels so I can label things and people know what I'm talking about. We usually don't present these tables directly like that. Sometimes we might present them a little bit different. So that's why they're printed out that way. But this is what it looks like to us. These are the rates. You can see the first month, about 1% come back. And it also helps you to validate your data, because if you start seeing 1 month 15% and everybody's 1%, then you know something's wrong. By the time 12 months went by, 15.4% of the individuals had reoffended. And that's that total. Now I can tell which totals they are. And like I said, when people don't believe your data, they're going to ask for the raw details. I can actually give them the 17 that actually reoffended. And I can even tell them for what they reoffended. Those that did not have any new offense, and then the totals. And we do a simple calculation. 17 divided by 100, that should say 110,000, not 101. It's 15.4%. Just in case you guys are really good at math. So when we were done, we took a look at the results. What you see, the blue line, those are the recidivism for every baseline month. And you can see that at the beginning of in January, it was 13%. And by the time December come, it was 16%. What was really weird is the control group follows the same pattern. To this day, I don't quite understand how the pandemic impacted the data that way. I think everybody was at home telecommuting is something, and then they started acting up again. Richard's going to go over a little bit of the findings. some of the findings actually surprised me because even though we're looking at the raw data, as soon as I start seeing numbers, I said, "Oh, I make you a bet that those people that took it online have a higher recidivism because they're not paying attention. They're probably doing something else, watching a video, but we'll see the results."
Thank you, Bert. So we examined the main finding was we wanted to see if there was a program effect, if there was differences between those in the defensive driving program and drivers who did not take the course. We also wanted to look, within age and across gender, and the executive office also wanted to look between urban and rural counties, as well as some instructional methods. So there was an effect. As you can see in the blue represents, the one on the left represents the percentage of recidivism for defense, for those drivers who are in the defensive driving program. And the red are those in the comparison group. So you can see there's a difference, 20.3% of the drivers reoffended within 12 months in the comparison, whereas in those who took the course, it was only 15.4%. And this is true across, no matter if you look at within age group, or if you look with gender, or the size of the counties, the comparison group always had higher reoffense rates than those in the defensive driving group. So, knowing that, my question to you is, what do you think the relationship is between age and recidivism? Do you think that older adults reoffended more, or do you think younger adults reoffended? Mm-hmm. So how many said older adults reoffended more? Okay, and then how many younger adults? Okay. All right. So those who are younger reoffended more often, or they were more likely to reoffend the younger adults than were the older adults. The top line is for the comparison group, and the solid blue line is for those who are in the defensive driving group. How about gender? Do you think there was a gender effect? All right. Raise your hand if you think females reoffended more often. Okay, raise your hands if you think males reoffended more often. That's right. Let's see. Yep, males reoffended more often. On the left side, the blue is the defensive driving group, and the left, and then the red is the comparison group. So you can see the females. If you compare the blue to the blue, you can see the males have a higher rate, and in the red that males had a higher rate of reoffense. Do you think population size influenced traffic reoffense rates? So we have Maricopa County, which is the largest county in Maricopa. Do you think the reoffense rates were higher in Maricopa County or in the other counties? How many think it's the largest county that there was higher reoffense rates? All right. How many think that it was the other counties? Well, let's take a look. So you can see from Maricopa County, for those who are in the blue, who attended the defensive driving program, they reoffended more than the other counties, as well for the comparison group. And the reason being is, if you're engaged in more traffic, higher traffic, you're more likely, if you have to drive more, you're engaging with other drivers, you're more likely to have an incident, right? We also examined the instructional methods, and so those who took the class in person or online, there was no difference in reoffense. As well, if you take it in English or in Spanish, there was no difference that we found. So Bert's going to talk about, summarize what we just spoke about, and what are the key takeaways.
Okay. So in summary, we're hoping that some of these experience that we have with defensive driving, some of the challenges that we have, will help you in the future. We're able to narrow the scope by building categories because it was easier to start kicking some of the records out. We're able to save 3 months of data and stay on schedule by imputing the missing gender. And by the way, that court that had a lot of missing gender, they contracted with a company that said, we don't need to give you gender. I said, well, it's in your driver's license, just pick it up. And said they were going to start picking that up. I don't really like to make the courts go back because it's a lot of work. Now they had to key in 313,000. And then we also use SAS to do the matching algorithm. That's very simple to understand. One thing that I don't like sometimes when I do recidivism studies is that I have, let's say, 10,000 on the one group and 8,890 on the other one. I like to give them the same because then people start questioning the data. They say, well, that's not right. You have a few more that is probably lowering your rate. We also gave them a random number because there's a lot more that were eligible, but we want to make sure the last one or the middle one, they can all get into the sample. That's why we use the random number. And then the reporting. This saves me a lot of time, and I tend to write programs that way, thinking, what is they going to come up with? Maybe I should make them a little bit more dynamic. So I'm not sitting here another week, say I need another week to validate what I'm giving you. But as Napoleon says, this is what we have, this is our presentation, and thank you for coming. And I'll take a few questions if you have some, but go out and do great things. That's what Napoleon says. We did this study, and I think it saves the program. So because when we do these effectiveness studies, there's a lot of individuals behind this. It could be 30 or 40 individuals, and we want to make sure that the public knows that they're doing a good job of training those individuals. The recidivism, those that take the class are 30% less to reoffend. Yes?
I was just wondering if you were able to see the output in terms of financial or loss of life. Like if there's a 7-point gap between somebody taking the class and somebody not taking the class, the people who didn't take the class or 7 points higher or whatever, maybe got into accidents that caused loss of life or insurance damage or something like that, that you could say that 7-point gap relates to, $4 million in savings for, Maricopa County or something like that.
I didn't do it this time, but in the past we have, and there was enough data. We could just concentrate on this, but we can tell if those individuals got into an accident and it caused some life. But even keeping the streets safer was enough for us. But there is.
Given there was no difference between in-person and online, is the thought that they should switch to just online only, or what? Based on your results, what are sort of the thoughts of how are they going to change the system?
Thank you. That was an important question for me when I was doing it. The paper's 30 pages long, so when we presented that data before, let's say before COVID, because that's only about, I don't remember exact number, but about 30% used to go online. After that, and even to this day, it's 64%. So more and more people are taking it online, and we were proving that the effectiveness is still there. So I think more and more they're going more and more online on that. They were also concerned that if you're doing it in Spanish or in English, that it made a difference, and it showed there was no difference. So thank you. I think that's an important question.
What kind of statistical analysis did you use? Were they descriptive of the percentage differences? Did you use ProcLogistic, or can we see your code?
Yeah. Richard, can you
or
answer that?
Information, not to test you.
So I have a background in statistics, and when I started working for the court system, I started learning right away that we don't deal with statistics, we deal with parameters, because we have the whole population that we're dealing with. I did an effect size, and I think an effect size would be a better indicator. Statistically, the sample was so large that we had enough people for it to be statistically significant. So I did look at the effect size. It was substantial for the two groups. I just don't remember what effects index did I use. Thank you for the question.
Well, thank you. Is there any other questions?
That was great. Thank you. Having gone through this now, if you got asked to do this again, based on what you know now, what would you change about your design, your approach, and why?
I think the question that came up earlier, how is this saving? What is this? I think we would include more of that. We would also validate some of the records before we start using them, because I don't want to be caught with a month to go and I still have a problem that's going to take 3 months. I don't know why I did that. I mean, I've been doing recidivism for a long time, but sometimes you get to be my age, you get lulled into a false sense of security. So, but that's some of the things that I would do. I think I would also take a look at like people using the cell phone a little bit more. Some of the things that are more new that we didn't have before. As I tell my kids, when I went to college, we didn't have cell phones.
Another thing that I think we would have done is instead of using that matching technique, we would use propensity score matching. VIA has a PS match for that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you use other versions, just look at a propensity score matching.
Well, thank you.